There's not a lot of data or science behind this topic specifically. One, because there's not a lot of research about trans people, and two, because there's not a lot of research about women or people who are assigned female at birth. So we're already starting with like a lower threshold because of the population that we're talking about. But there has been a lot of very well done research that has come out recently that very strongly indicates that people who medically transition, so they were assigned male at birth and then they transition to become a woman, not only do they not have a biologic advantage when they go in, they tested at 1 year and 2 years and 3 years, but by the time they hit that 2 and 3 year mark, at all of these landmarks, especially in the 2 to 3 year landmark, not only was there no biological advantage that they found trans women to have, trans women were actually found to have decreased muscle mass, decreased muscle tone, and decreased bone density compared to their cisgender counterparts. What that means non-scientifically, in layman's terms, is that we should not be indicating in any way that trans women should not be playing in sports because they have no advantage. If anything, they're at a disadvantage because what a lot of people don't understand is that sometimes part of medical transition for a trans woman, so somebody who is assigned male at birth or born as a man and then transitioned medically to become a woman, is that sometimes they take testosterone blockers. So cis women have a natural amount of testosterone that's in their body that they don't block. So there's a certain amount of testosterone that's in their bodies that's considered normal. When you take testosterone blockers, you block 100% of the testosterone. And so they are at an inherent disadvantage because we know that testosterone helps build muscle mass and it helps do a lot of the things that are required to be good at sport. And so not only are they taking estrogen, they're actually sometimes blocking their testosterone.
So
Yeah.
I do want to quickly touch on sort of, I mean, we've talked about kind of the physical challenges that trans athletes face and how that, kind of misinformation that's spread about them is generally quite false. But based on the experiences that you've had with trans athletes, could you expand on issues of how maybe rejection from sports overall kind of impacts, athlete mental health and even physical rehabilitation if there's a case there?
I was actually just about to talk about this because I actually think a huge part of gender affirming care is creating an affirming space for folks to feel welcome. And so we talk about it in terms of trans athletes, but we also talk about it in terms of like mourning the communities that we had. So, for example, there are some trans mask folks who used to identify as lesbians. And so, like, these lesbian spaces were really important to them, or these women spaces were really important to them and a big part of their identity. And now they don't fit into that category anymore. And so they like lost this whole community. And so the same is true for trans women in sport. And it's it's really hard. So I was an athlete. I was an athlete through college. And I can tell you firsthand that being an athlete, like it's our entire identity. It is like I didn't know how to know my worth outside of how my body participated in sport. And so like I had this on a much lesser scale, but like even when I graduated college and I stopped playing my sport, I had this like moment where I was like, I don't know who I am. I don't know how to know if I'm good at life or existing because like nobody's telling me my performance was good or bad. And so this is on a much larger scale for especially trans women in sport, because the ones who are getting the most attention are very good at their sport. And so, they're not even like, oh, like I'm just done with my sport. They're like, I'm very good. I might be at the higher levels of this sport, but because of all of this backlash and this misinformation, they just can't participate. And there have been some organizations that, they'll put trans women in untested categories. So trans women will be competing against people who are on performance enhancing drugs or for whatever reason don't want to be drug tested. And so there are like these kind of what I'll put in quotes workarounds. The trans women can literally compete, but they can't compete in the category that they should be competing in, and that's the problem. And so the mental health aspect of this is real. She's a little bit younger than me, but I actually went to school with Leah Thomas and I in high school. She's a swimmer and she won the NCAA swimming, one of the swimming categories. And then the swimmers who got second and third actually sued the NCAA because they didn't think Leah Thomas should be competing. And so it was like this big scandal and it was a kind of this whole thing. And even just thinking about a situation like that, Leah Thomas is literally at the top of her sport. She's literally the best in the country. And she got very, very public backlash. And I also think it's important here to say that there is inherent connection between transphobia, racism, and misogyny. And so, like, if we're sitting here saying like trans women shouldn't play sports, but misogyny, like it's all just so interconnected. And we see that at the highest level. We saw that at the Olympics with the Algerian boxer who people just thought her body presented not like a cis woman. And she had to get all of this testing and she had to do all these things. And people were slandering her all over social media. And it turns out she's cis. And she's a cis woman of color. And the misogyny comes in because men just were like, or the patriarchy or society just was like, this person doesn't look like a cis woman should. She's too big, she's too bulky, she's beating people too badly. And so the intersection between these three is real. And that's the scary part is people who are okay with transphobia but not okay with racism and or misogyny and not understanding that these are all very, very connected, which is why we should all be coming together in this way.
Now, I know that a lot of institutions previous to what's happened recently with the NCAA and with some, high school scholastic level organizations, prior to that, there were rules and regulations to allow trans women to participate in cisgender women's sports, and including like testosterone levels that they need to reach or whatever it might be. What's your perspective on having guidelines like that surrounding how much, testosterone versus estrogen or other kind of guidelines to allow trans women or trans men to play in the sports categories that they should be playing in?
I think it's a cop out, if I'm being totally honest. We know that gender is not binary. We know that. We know sex is not binary. We know that there are intersex folks who have varying levels of hormones, who have non-consensual surgeries at birth to assume their gender, right? I'm AFAB. I was assigned female at birth. And my whole life, like I started growing facial hair at a really young age. I was seeing an endocrinologist to try to manage my testosterone levels. I'm a person that has generally higher testosterone than, and I don't know this for sure because I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, my numbers or like the normal numbers, but I was never tested to play in women's sports. I played in D1 college tennis and the NCAA did not care about my hormone levels because I was assigned female at birth. Now, we don't know what my levels are and we don't know how they compare to quote unquote normal. But because of how I was born, nobody cares. And so we're just using really trans women as the scapegoat to say, pull down your pants and then I'll let you play. Take this blood test and then I'll let you play. When we know that there are people who have varying hormone levels that we're not testing. And instead of saying, and maybe this is a little bit simplistic, and it probably is for this like very, very not simple thing, but like there's this thing in sports where, we're like, hey, if we lose, it's because we weren't good enough or they were better than us, or maybe a combination of the two. So if we want to beat them, we have to get better.
Mhm.
And so instead of just using that mindset and being like, oh my God, this is dope because now I have to get better and be better and be like, I want to beat the best to be the best. They're like, oh, I can just sue this person or I can create this scapegoat or I can fearmonger this community and everything will be fine. And then I don't have to take any responsibility for the fact that this person is just better than me. And like it's just this really interesting mentality. Because like, if a cis woman beat another cis woman, right? That's kind of what they would say. Of course, there might be some whatever, but like very generally they would say that, right? Like she was better than me, I need to get better. And for some reason, this community has just come under fire in an extreme way, and it is absolutely fear-mongering and absolutely ridiculous. And if they were, which they should not, but if they were to test hormones of every person who's competing at every level, we would see highly variable levels of hormones. And we would probably find out that a larger percentage that we think are intersex. And that's how a lot of people find out that they're intersex is they're like, oh my God, these levels are crazy. Like, of course I have PCOS or, like whatever it is. It just feels like, they needed a scapegoat, and this is a really easy community to target because it's a marginalized community of an already marginalized community, and they know that they can separate us and say, we know that part of the LGBTQ community will turn on the T.